すでに射程距離に入っている。今度は逃がさない。キングカレムゾン。
Okay, everybody, get your crockpot recipes ready because I have more non-oppressive filler content for you all. This time we are going to be doing armor and helmets. Like the melee weapons tier list, we are mainly going to be talking about worth, as in how much worth do you actually get out of making and using this armored armor. And there's plenty of suits of armor we are going to talk about, and if we have time we'll also do some single player don't starve stuff. One more thing, I won't be ranking either of the shields because I kind of already roped them in as weapons, but if you want a ranking for them I would probably put both of them around, I don't know, B tier. But with that being said, let's get right into it with the most widely available and average armors in the entire game, the log suit. Now the log suit is not bad at all, offering 80% protection and decent durability, but will fundamentally always be in the shadow of football helmet for two main reasons. First, the log suit, depending on how high you value pigskin, is fairly more expensive than it, despite it having basically the same armor value. Secondly, and more importantly, the log suit is placed on your chest slot, meaning you can't wear a backpack while wearing one, which you should be wearing at pretty much all times. This means the log suit, despite being extremely efficient and fairly durable, is often not going to be a sleight of hand swap to in time to prevent you from taking any form of stupid damage. For its general resource cost usefulness, but somewhat lower value, I'm putting it in B tier. And speaking of football hat, we can go ahead and do that next.
Oh man, the football!
Football hat is arguably one of the best all-around armors in the entire game, and in most cases will be a fast and easy craft, giving great value protection and good durability, and most importantly being taken in the head slot. The only issue that comes from the football helmet is it is slightly less replicable than log suits, meaning if you run out of foreskin shrines to desecrate and instead decide to destroy an entire pig village like a fucking marauder, you will find yourself slowly starting to starve out of pigskins in your world. Therefore, with its great use and easily fixable single issue, I'm giving it the title of S tier. Next up, an uncommon, but not unheard of armor is that of the marble suit. Now the marble suit is not a weak armor by any means, carrying a 95% protection, which outclasses pretty much every other armor in the game, on top of also having a high durability of 735 and some knockback resistance. It's also not even that hard to make, given you've had at least one source of marble on the world. However, this armor also comes with a single horrible cost of 30% movement speed, making it impractical for a lot of boss fights. There are a few boss fights though where this armor absolutely shines, for instance with the shadow pieces being the most relevant. All in all, it is a tank's armor of choice, and deserves the ranking of B tier for those who want to take hundreds of blows from enemies, while also pretending that they are invincible. Moving right along, we have the knight armor, being the only other armor in the game with a 95% protection rate, and on top of that, it doesn't have the move speed debuff. And with its decent durability of 525, you would think that this would put it on par of S tier, but you would actually be wrong for two main reasons. First off, like marble suits, this is a chest slot, not a helmet, meaning it loses its all-around usage almost immediately. There are some armors that you can use all around and that mitigates this downside, but this armor isn't one of them. Secondly, this thing drains your sanity at 10 a minute, along with losing sanity every time you get hit, and unlike Dreadstone and Voidcloth, this drain doesn't have any counter benefit of repairing your armor or increasing your abilities or anything like that, meaning if you were to wear this thing for anything other than single boss fights, or if you're fighting Celestial Champion or other bright creatures, you are going to go insane faster than if you realize the true SCP-001, the Architect, may have actually been an intentional creation in order to create a bulwark sort of to protect the galaxy from what lies beyond. Man, he did not want to die. Ultimately, I think it's a better choice for some boss fights than marble armor, but not by much, and since it costs more too, I'm just going to pop it in roughly the same as if not slightly higher than marble suits. Scale Mail. Yeah, this one might come as a surprise to some, but F tier. Scale Mail is simply not a good armor in regards to worth at all. It has a 70% protection, which isn't bad on its own, but to clarify, this is 10% less than both the log suit and football helmet. It lights its attackers on fire, but in DST, as I clarified in a short earlier on, fire damage is one of the weakest damage types ever, usually not even surpassing 30 damage over a 7-second period. It does have a high durability of 945 going for it, but its final and arguably biggest problem is the fact that in order to get the thing, you need to kill Dragonfly and use its scale to make it. It could be used as a deterrent in PvP or in single player Don't Starve due to the fire damage being different there, but ultimately in regular playthrough, I would sooner craft a grass suit than scale mail, and that the material cost of it would actually be used to make 2 football hats instead, and therefore I can't put this thing any higher than F tier. So, grass suit. The grass suit is less of armor and rather something you craft as a nervous tick due to the lack of armor in an immediate situation. It has a 60% protection, being the lowest possible protection an armor can give in Don't Starve, and an equally pathetic 150 durability. Lastly, its crafting cost of 10 grass and 2 twigs is just enough to not be valuable but still offensive. However, it does have the plus side of being the only armor in the game that requires no science at all or prerequisites of any way to craft, meaning if you're rushing or a speedrunner, you can make one just before a significant fight, and since it will technically more than double the amount of damage you can take compared to without armor, it's not a terrible idea to make one, if you're doing that. But since most players rushing will have a science machine if not an alchemy engine up before they even go after the boss, it's really more than just a better than nothing emergency craft that belongs in low D tier. Thulecite Suit. Thulecite Suit is honestly a pretty great armor for both tanking and general fights. Reason being, on top of having a 90% protection, surprisingly less than marble suits, and the highest durability of any armor at 1260, it also has 0 downsides and even has a little 3.3 sanity gain aura, making it a high contending armor for A tier. I guess as a sort of downside, or rather lack of an upside, is that it is a chest slot instead of a helmet, which keeps it out of S tier, and there is also a Thulecite variant of the helmet too, so there's really no excuse moving right along. I'll go ahead and do all the character-specific armors next, starting with Wig Fridge's Battle Helmet. It is essentially a football helmet with a bit more durability, and a different resource cost, which you could say is either more or less expensive, depending on what you need at the moment. And since we have already established that football helmets are God tier, I could see somebody putting the battle helmet S tier. However, I'm actually going to put it in A tier due to the simple fact that it does require a Wig Fridge to craft it, but like top of A tier. And on top of that, I'm also going to go ahead and put the Commander's Helm. I mean, it does have other benefits, but all of them except the knockback resistance is Wig Fridge specific. So overall, as an armor item, it doesn't really have too much of an effectiveness increase. Hardwood Hat. And in all honesty, the Hardwood Hat is everything the cookie cutter cap wishes it could be. And that is a cheap substitute for football helmets. Costing only 6 logs, a pine cone, and requiring woody for the craft, you get a 70% protection helmet with 260 durability. This might not seem like much, and it isn't, but for what it costs, it is extremely cost effective, especially early game. If it did not require woody specifically for the craft, it would be significantly higher on the list, potentially even A or S tier. Cookie Cutter Cap is really similar, so I'll do that one too, being basically the double the durability and being non-player specific for a really ineffective material cost, requiring you to go out to sea in order to make one. Both of them belong in C tier, with Hardwood Hats being much greater. For the last character specific, we have Bramble Husk, and I actually didn't even realize that the protection on these were buffed to 80% because I always wear them with helmets. But what's far more important is that this armor is a direct counter to Bee Queen, and unlike Scale Mail, this armor does actually competent damage to attackers and stuns them too. This makes it very useful for many fights, and this is also the only armor that can do this besides Cactus Armor for single player Don't Starve and WX-78's Zap module. This makes it one of the more valuable tool armors in the game. It does require wormwood and living logs to craft, but seeing as to how wormwood basically naturally excretes living logs, it has the well-deserved placement of A tier for the ability to turn your entire team into walking pin cushions. Next up is both Snurtle Shell Armor and the Shellmet. Now before I rank these, I want to preface this by saying that both of these are objectively good armors item-wise. Shellmet has 525 durability and a 90% protection, making it the second strongest planar helmet in DST. Snurtle Shell Armor, although having only a 60% protection, has 730 durability and has the ability to go into a 100% protection when in cover with it. That being said, both of these armors are a pain in the ass to gather and are completely chance-based. I'm just going to go ahead and put up the spawn rate, chances of Slurtle Mounds, and Slurtle drop rates on the screen. And looking through these chances, you have roughly a 16% chance to get an armor every time one spawns. To top it off, Slurtles are notoriously a bitch to kite, will retreat into their shells every few attacks, and have over 1000 HP. For all of these reasons, it's not really practical to make any type of play with either of these armors, and thus both of them belong firmly in D tier, with Snurter Shell armor being slightly greater just due to its invincibility block.
Can you die?
You can't kill Suction Cup Man.
Beekeeper Hat is self-explanatory. You use it for one thing, and that one thing is to fight Bee Queen. After that, you might as well just take it off and leave it next to Bee Queen's spawn, because it doesn't provide protection for anything else. Therefore, I'll just say C tier since it has literally one purpose, but it fulfills that purpose well. Now, the Bee Queen crown you get from killing Bee Queen is a bit different, as it has only 70% protection considering you needed to kill Bee Queen for it, 945 durability, which is pretty good, but its most notable ability is that it turns insanity auras into sanity auras. In other words, standing next to bosses that drain your sanity at negative 400 a minute will now cause you to gain half that sanity instead. In other words, every boss fight now has a sanity aura of fighting something like Celestial Champion. This makes it really useful for late-game nightmare monster fights, specifically bosses like Fuel Weaver, who will frequently possess you every time your sanity dips too low. However, this is also very optional gear, and you can easily do fights like that without it. Therefore, since it requires KOing Bee Queen to get it, I'm more inclined to pop it into a tier like B tier. Now, moving on even more, we should talk about Fuel Weaver's drop, starting with the Bone Helm, which, on top of having identical protection and durability stats to Bee Queen Crown, takes the Insanity Aura a step further, and instead just instantly induces insanity effects, while also making you neutral towards most insanity creatures. Which it does technically reduce the need for sanity altogether, but since the fact that it requires Fuel Weaver's death, and also the average person doesn't want to play Benadryl Simulator 24/7, I'm gonna go ahead and pop it in B tier too. And with the mediocre Bone Helm comes the absolute fucking Ascendant Bone Armor, also from Fuel Weaver, which is straight to S tier. Now, the Bone Armor is the only armor in the game that offers 0% protection from attacks. And you might be asking, well, why is it S tier? And that is because every 5 seconds it blocks an attack in its entirety. And since most bosses have a cooldown of at least 3 seconds between attacks, as long as you don't get hit twice in a row, this armor renders you virtually invincible to most bosses. Also, it never fully breaks, and you can refuel with Nightmare Fuel. Keep in mind, it does have 0 protection, so in those 5 seconds, if you get hit, you will be basically armorless. So bosses like Lunar Champion, Bee Queen, or Claws may be more dangerous to you, but at the same time, there's nothing stopping you from wearing something like a football helmet with it. And in all honesty, the 0 protection is a small price to pay for 90% of the time being literally invincible.
When will you all accept that you cannot kill me?
Next up we have the Eye Mask, and yeah, the Eye Mask is good for what it is. And what it is basically a football helmet that lets you repair it. It has identical stats to one, and you can feed it food and rot in order to repair the damage. And I can honestly see this as pretty useful overall, but there's still 2 issues with it. One, it doesn't have a broken state, meaning if you are in a fight that requires more than one football hat, and you aren't fast enough to repair it, you lose the hat forever. And 2, you have to kill a boss in order to get it, and this is literally the only reason for killing that boss. The boss itself isn't too bad to fight, but it's also not a pushover, and it is often a project that you won't be able to do in a single day. So ask yourself the question, is it really worth it to fight a boss for a helmet that could very easily break if I'm not paying attention? I could honestly see the use in it, but I would really just rather strive for something like that in my spare time. Top of C tier or bottom of B tier, you make the call. Thulecite Crown. Now, Thulecite Crown is a self-explanatory S tier. 90% protection, 840 durability. It is basically a football helmet that is exponentially better, and on top of that, contracts a little bubble shield around you every now and then that blocks all damage. The only exception being it costs Thulecite and Nightmare Fuel, and needs the Ancient Science Station to craft, but since you are usually there to craft something else to begin with, and if you have caves enabled on your world, you will eventually go there anyways. You are basically guaranteed to be crafting Thulecite Crowns out of any spare material, which mitigates the accessibility debuff under football helmets by a fair amount. S tier. Finishing up the DST list, we can do the 4 planar armors next, and I'm gonna go ahead and rank the suits with their helmets at the same time. Some of them do different things depending on helmet to armor, but in pretty much every single case, the helmet is better than the armor. Starting off with, in my opinion, being the best of the 4, is Dreadstone Armor and Helmet. Now, this may come as a surprise, as out of the 4 armors, this is the one of the 2 with lower planar defense rating, being half of what Broidcloth and Brightshade are. And on top of that, being the only armor of the 4 that can be permanently destroyed. And my reason for why is, 1, this is the only armor out of the 4 that repairs itself. The other 3 can be repaired, but require specific repair kits to do so. Dreadstone armor, however, will rapidly mend any damage done to it using the player's own sanity to do so. And secondly, because Dreadstone is the only armor that can be achieved without ever killing either of the in-game bosses. And you may ask, didn't I just rank Eye Mask low because it can be broken permanently and because it requires an individual boss to get? And my response to that is that Dreadstone armor has 840 durability for both the armor and the helmet, which is almost 3 times that of the Eye Mask. And on top of that, it is constantly repairing itself as long as it's below 100%, meaning there's no possible way that this sneaks up on you in a fight. And lastly, it's not like you aren't going to craft either Brightshade or Voidcloth armor too to replace this once you get a surplus of the gear, but this armor will always be a contendable option from the start of the game, all the way to the end. Therefore, I could say that it could be either an A or the only in-game planar armor that belongs in S tier. Following this, we have the 2 Crossroads armors. Brightshade you get on the Celestial Champion campaign, and Voidclaw from the Fuel Weaver campaign. Now, both of these offer the exact same protection of 80% and durabilities. Where they diverge is with their passive effects. Brightshade reflects 10% damage back on attackers and prevents the player from being attacked by Charlie. However, Voidcloth blocks negative sanity auras and increases your damage with shadow weapons. This makes Voidcloth Helmet better due to its damage increase, implying that you've also gotten shadow weapons, with the whole Brightshade set being better than Voidcloth armor. Plus, you can also mix and match the Brightshade armor with Celestial Crown, so the damage output will be roughly the same regardless of which route you go down. Ultimately though, both are completely acceptable options, therefore I'm going to rank them in the following order, right next to each other, with Voidcal being at the top as it's what grants the actual damage increase, but Brightshade armor being more all around. And lastly, we have the Wagstaff Don't Starve Warbus armor. And I have to say it's the worst of the 4. It isn't a bad armor by any means. As a matter of fact, the Warbus helmet can actually give you a 20% damage increase in fights, and the armor can make you go 20% faster in individual fights, which actually has better results than the other planar armors, and even has 85% standard protection instead of the standard 80. So why is it so low? It's because it is so goddamn expensive compared to the others that it's not even remotely worth it sometimes. It requires enlightened shards to craft, and if you don't know what those are essentially the components that make up the lunar crown I mentioned earlier, meaning yes, you have to destroy the crown, which already gives a significant damage buff in order to obtain Warbus armor. And to top it all off, it only has 5 planar protection and lower durability than the others. Keep in mind that there is supposedly a chance of getting an Enlightened Shard on its own from a Celestial Champion, so I could definitely see someone just making a Warbus helmet, but I don't usually get just a single shard, or I'm missing it. Therefore, I'm giving Warbus armor and helmet the lowest ranking of the planar armors, though that's still an A tier due to the fact that it's still a rather good armor.
That clock keeps ticking like a...
Alright, now let's speed through the single-player Don't Starve armors. Cactus armor is basically just Wormwood's Bramble Husk, but you don't need to be Wormwood, and you do need to go into a volcano to get it. All in all, it's a bit more complicated to get than Bramble armor, but not by much, and not character locked, so A tier. Both Mant Mask and Mant Suit are literally just log suits and football helmets, and take those armors in order to make them, and they're really just simple ways to refresh nearly destroyed armor, and also you can use them to appease the Mant, so I'll just put them behind their respective armors. Seashell Suit and Horned Helmet are both poison protective gear. On top of that, Seashell Suit has 75% damage protection, and Horned Helmet has 85%. And on both of them requires something totally different from Pigskin to craft. These honestly come across as more than anything as just alternative armors compared to the standard requirements for armor crafting. I don't really think Seashell Suit beats a Log Suit, not in damage or usefulness, but for Horned Helmet, if you have spare water beefalo horns, I could easily see you throwing together several of these. Obsidian armor is literally scale mail. Haha! Boy, you're about to get roasted. Yeah, straight to F tier, no further comments. Tin Suit, Fancy Helmet, and Limestone Suit are all just basically variants of the Marble Suit, and all 3 of them are total garbage compared to it. I'll start with the Fancy Helmet, it being one of the only helmets in the game that will slow the player by 10%. It does have 5% more protection and 1,200 durability going for it, which is tied with Thulecite Crown for the most durability of a helmet. However, its 10% movement speed reduction is more than enough of a dissuade factor, and the fact that you have to smelt metal in order to even craft the thing, I would still take it when it's found in bandit sashes though. However, the Tin Suit, which is even worse on the account of the fact that it having the exact same stats that it's not a helmet. Paired together, they would make a pretty good tanking armor, and once again, you should take them if you find them at a bandit stash. However, once again, you could achieve better and more efficient results with cheaper armors. And thus we have Limestone Suit, the absolute worst of the three, which not only carries a 10% speed debuff, but only has 70% protection. In other words, not only does it require heavy armor movement, but it doesn't even have heavy armor protection. It does have a little 2 per minute sanity aura to it, but this is completely ruined by the fact that it's not a hat and it still has the speed debuff. Therefore, I will rank all 3 of these as low D tier, moving right along. The visor is exactly as advertised. It is a high durability helmet with 5% more protection than the football helmet and more durability. But it is a Wagstaff only craft, and if you do use it as a non-Wagstaff, you suffer a vision debuff. And furthermore, it's single player, so good luck using that as someone who isn't Wagstaff. Honestly, there's not really much to say, it's just a Wagstaff football helmet, B tier, whatever. The Weevil Mantle is basically a slightly better grass suit, meant to protect you in the humid season of Hamlet. Essentially, it's one of the only armors you can wear during humid without suffering a significant slow to your movement, and it also has 900 durability. However, when I say slightly better grass suit, I'm referring to its below average protection at only 65%, which is worse than most things, and on top of that, it requires an alchemy engine to craft, so it's not exactly the go-to armor. However, given that it's one of the only counters to the human season 90% of the time, I have an alchemy engine pocketed before day 3, and the only other thing you can use Weevil carapaces for is making tacos. I can understand the reason for creating them, and therefore I'll leave them in C tier, as even with their garbage protection, they do have a purpose. And lastly, we have the S tier ranking Vortex Cloak. So starting off, this is the only armor in the game that is also a backpack, meaning the hat complaint does not apply to it. But it is also an armor that can deflect 100% of physical damage and be refueled with nightmare fuel just like the bone armor. But this combined with the fact that it also functions as a backpack with 10 slots puts it beyond even the bone armor. It does drain your sanity on hit, and also has not too great durability, so it isn't perfect, and it requires you to kill the Ancient Herald to craft it. However, that's literally nothing compared to killing Ancient Fuelweaver, so when it comes to great all-around armor, it doesn't get much better than the Vortex Cloak. Wait, what was that? But that'll about do it for this tier list. Leave me a comment telling me what you think, and subscribe with notifications for more. Make sure you check my community polls too, as that's where I update you all with what I'm doing. I hope my next video will be a bigger scale, higher quality video, as I'm not in a position to prepare my 100k celebration yet, and... oh shit, more MTF. Okay, that's our time!
Kill Stal!